Hello, and welcome to this video. I wanted to give you some examples of people who have used the secret of the Nexus to find power, money, and whatever else they wished for in their lives. If you're anything like me, you probably want to get an idea of what can be achieved or how you'll benefit before you commit to doing anything. After all, who wants to put in a lot of effort and get nothing in return, right? Well, I can assure you that this isn't anything that will waste your time. And when you see how well others before you have used the magic of Monarch's system, either knowingly or instinctively, I know you'll immediately start thinking about how you would use the power of the Nexus for yourself and loved ones. But in order for you to understand all of this, it's important for you to also understand what a Merlin is. You may already be familiar with the legend of King Arthur. If not, let me summarize the story quickly for you. Basically, as a young boy, Arthur was just a peasant, just a regular person like anyone else. He happens to make the acquaintance of an old man who begins teaching him, and this man was, of course, the famous Merlin of the legend. Now, Merlin is a powerful wizard who seems to teach Arthur not magic, but something else, because Arthur isn't remembered as a wizard at all. But what could Merlin have taught him then, if not magic? The answer, of course, is that Merlin did indeed teach Arthur magic after all. He taught him the magic of the Nexus. Arthur began using this knowledge, and by practicing this magic, he later became the King of England. You may have also heard the part where Arthur becomes king by being the only person who is capable of pulling a sword from a stone, a special task whereby it had been declared that whoever should do so would be king. What the story doesn't explain is why Arthur was the only one who could do this. Arthur wasn't the strongest person in England. In fact, he was known as being relatively normal in stature and not overly impressive physically. And yet, he still succeeded where others had failed before him. The answer to this is that Arthur was able to pull the sword from the stone, a seemingly impossible task, because he was empowered by something else, namely the power of magic, stemming from his ability to control the Nexus. Merlin had taught him this knowledge, just as every great leader has been shown in one form or another. This knowledge allows one to shape his or her destiny and even change the world. You might ask then, if Merlin was so powerful, why wasn't he proclaimed king? Why didn't he pull the sword from the stone? And the answer is in the form of another question. Who is to say who was the real king? The young man who pulled the sword from the stone and to whom everyone else bowed down to? Or the old man whom the proclaimed king served? When all men follow one man, and that one man follows another man, all of them are really following the latter. And so Merlin could shape England through Arthur, and later Arthur would indeed rule alone without the aid of Merlin when he was ready. Now, most people know the story of the rise and fall of Camelot as well. This is the name for the kingdom that Arthur had essentially brought into existence. This is the true power of the Nexus, to be able to build entire kingdoms and societies based on its power. This is the heart of what the Nexus does. And in this way, you can use the power of the Nexus to build your own kingdom of any scale, be it small or large, to suit you and to benefit the ones you care about most. The degree to which you will be able to do this depends on how well you master the magic of Monarchs. And in the end, when Camelot fell from power, it wasn't outside invaders or any great natural disaster that destroyed the kingdom. Sadly, it was Arthur himself who brought about its untimely demise. Arthur forgot about his earlier teachings and began to let the negativity of his personal relationships undo his magic, and he lost control of the Nexus. Later in life, varied and strange circumstances that led to King Arthur's rage, jealousy, and hatred ultimately undo his magic faster than any invasion ever could have. And how often have we seen this story repeated in history? We've all known of politicians who, through various scandals, have fallen from their positions of power. Entire civilizations have vanished because they've forgotten too much about the Nexus. Whether the information has failed to be passed on or because the people of a nation become too proud and ignorant to accept the truth of the Nexus and the magic of Monarchs, one thing is always clear. That civilization, nation, or group will come to an end. Now, I'd like to give you examples of various people who've come to power not because it was handed to them, but because they were able to achieve it themselves. These are historical figures that had at least some, if not a great deal of knowledge pertaining to the magic of Monarchs. Some of these people had an incomplete knowledge, but there can be no denying that their power came from something greater than themselves. Our first example is Genghis Khan, a great conqueror of the 12th century, who was the founder and emperor of the Mongol Empire, the single greatest contiguous empire in history. He was the third son born to the chief of a humble nomadic tribe, but rose to greatness quickly, uniting many greater tribes together into a powerful nation. His Merlin, or teacher, was Togrul, the blood brother of his father and leader of another tribe. Another great example from history is Alexander the Great. Although born as a simple prince of Greece, he lived on to conquer many different countries and territories in the surrounding areas, ultimately expanding his empire to become the single largest ever known in human history. Alexander the Great's Merlin was Aristotle, the well-known philosopher and scholar. Now, not all examples are of political leaders, of course. For example, Bill Gates, famous for developing the large company known as Microsoft, was at one time very poor and even started his business out of his garage. From humble beginnings, he created a business empire that at one time surpassed $100 billion in value, albeit briefly. In this instance, it's important to note that the company of Microsoft itself is the kingdom, with Bill Gates as its ruler. Of course, Bill Gates had a Merlin too, but this figure is still in the shadows, as it were. All I can tell you is that he owns some of the original writings of Leonardo da Vinci, and this may serve as a clue as to the identity of his Merlin. And I'm going to end these examples with another important political figure within the last 100 years, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, commonly called FDR. The only president elected to 4 terms, some of his accomplishments include the ending of World War II, whereby his greater knowledge of the magic of Monarchs and of the Nexus enabled him to put an end to the Axis leaders. While Hitler undoubtedly had some of this knowledge too, his corruption of this power for evil purposes ultimately led to his weakening, and FDR was able to use this to great advantage. Another accomplishment in his presidency was the creation of the United Nations, strangely reminiscent of the Round Table of Camelot. And perhaps the single greatest achievement that he was responsible for, though indirectly, through his use of the Nexus, would have been the creation of the single most deadly weapon ever to exist, known as the atomic bomb. This was a man who knew the power of the Nexus well. FDR's Merlin was Endicott Peabody, a headmaster of the Groton Episcopal boarding school where he had gone to school as a boy and young man. And as you can see, each of these great examples throughout history had teachers, or Merlins, that had taught them the magic of Monarchs and the power of the Nexus. The magic they controlled was powerful, and in each case, changed the world. Most people, however, never find a Merlin, and these people are called subjects in someone else's kingdom. There's no way to deny the power of the Nexus, and there's no denying the achievements possible to any man or woman who masters the magic of Monarchs. So please click the link to the next videos. I'd like to begin your initiation to the order in the form of an aura cleansing. This is a wonderful experience and something I'm sure you'll enjoy. Until next time, thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.